This brings us to the myth of Saturn. And I mentioned Medea and the serpents as symbols of healing and rebirth and immortality. This was the world of the Saturnian Bronze Age. These myths are retold by Hesiod and Homer. Saturn's name is derived from Satos, meaning sowing. And in late antiquity, Saturn would become synchronized with a number of deities. Cicero says that Saturn represents the power which maintains the cyclic course of times and seasons. This is the sense that the Greek name of the god bears, for he is called Cronus, which is the same as Chronos or time. Saturn, for his part, got his name because he was sated with years. He is the son of heaven who kills his father Aranos to take on the throne and become the king of the universe. After being told by an oracle that his son would usurp him the same way he usurps his father, he begins to eat his children so that none of them could ever usurp him. Hesiod's Theogony states, Kronos, after castrating his father Uranos, becomes the supreme ruler of the cosmos and weds his sister Rhea, by whom he begets 3 daughters and 3 sons, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. And lastly, wise Zeus, the youngest of the 6. He swallows each child as soon as they are born, having received a prophecy from his parents Gaia and Uranos, that one of his children is destined to one day overthrow him as his father. This causes Rhea increasing grief, and upon becoming pregnant with her 6th child, Zeus, she approaches her parents Gaia and Uranos, seeking a plan to save her child and bring retribution to Cronus. Following her parents' instructions, she travels to Lyctus in Crete, where she gives birth to Zeus, handing the newborn child over to Gaia for her raise, and Gaia takes him to a cave on Mount Aegeon. Rhea then gives to Cronus, in the place of the child, a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, which he promptly swallows, unaware that it isn't his son. What does this have to do with Satan and the devil? Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus. All 3 of them would become rulers of a certain realm. Hades is the king of the underworld, Poseidon, the king of the sea, and Zeus, the king of the heavens, as he usurps Saturn. Saturn, however, would go on to rule a specific part of the underworld, known as Elysium. This is the special part of Hades for people who attained a specific immortality from transmigration of the soul. So Saturn becomes the ruler and king of Hades, with his son Hades, also known as Pluto. In the religion of Orphism, these gods are heavily invoked in the hymns. Revelation 20:13 says, "And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. And there were open books, and one of them was the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their deeds, as recorded in the books. Then the sea gave up its dead, and then death and Hades gave up their dead. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire." These are pagan gods that are invoked in the Orphic hymns, being casted into the lake of fire in Revelation, the same book that mentions the great serpent Satan being cast down as well. This is there for a reason. Hades, or Pluto, the Greek underworld god, as I've mentioned, often conflated with Plutos, the god of wealth. Perhaps this is the reason why Satan in the desert is always offering wealth, always tempting with wealth. However, The god Dis Pater, the Roman underworld god equivalent of Pluto, who's often synced with Bacchus, father of the riches, Cicero calls him. He has the power to possess and give spirits to those who drink the wine in the ceremonies. In Dante's Divine Comedy, there is a location known as the City of Dis, which comprises Lower Hell. This is a play on the father Dis Pater. He is also associated with Jupiter. This underworld god is the king of all the pagan gods. Father Liber in the Roman religion, the free father, the god of wine, male fertility, and freedom, is the Roman equivalent of Dionysus and Bacchus. And after the spread of Hellenism, in fact, their mythologies would become one and the same. As Hellenism was spreading west, the conservatives from the old Etruscan religion rejected Bacchus. There was a decree laid out in the Senate, the suppression of Bacchus worship in 186 BCE. Shortly after the end of the Second Punic War, Livy tells us that a Bacchanalia's introduction by a foreign soothsayer, a Greek mean condition, a low operator of sacrifices. The cult spread in secret, like a plague. The lower classes, plebs, women, the young, morally weak and effeminate males are particularly susceptible. All such persons, fickle, uneducated minds, but even Rome's elite are not immune. The Bacchanalia's priestesses urge their deluded flock to break all social and sexual boundaries, even to visit ritual murder on those who oppose them or betray their secrets. But a loyal servant reveals all to a shocked Senate, whose quick thinking, wise actions, and piety save Rome from the divine wrath and disaster it would otherwise have suffered. Notice the demonization of Bacchus worship already happening in Rome in the 2nd century BCE. According to James Fraser, Bacchus, who's also identified with Osiris from Egypt, is depicted as a goat, like Pan. He's also depicted as a bull with horns. Here we have the idea of an evil horned god, who's none other than Bacchus himself. In Egypt, he is the son of Ammon, who's also king of the universe, like Father Liber and Dis Pater in Rome. He's depicted with horns, and he's the direct rival of Typhon. Ovid's Metamorphosis, written in the 1st century BCE, relays exactly this scene. He says, how Typhon, issuing from Earth's lowest depths, struck terror in those heavenly hearts, and they all turned their backs and fled until they found refuge in Egypt and the seven-mouthed Nile. She told how earth-born Typhon, even there, pursued them, and the gods concealed themselves in spurious shapes, and Jove became a ram. Lord of the herd, she said. And so today, the great Libyan Ammons shone with curling horns. Phobos, Apollo, hid as a raven. Bacchus, a goat. Phoebe, a cat. Juno, a snow-white cow. Venus, a fish. And Mercury, an ibis. The muse Calliope, who is the mother of Orpheus, retells this tale, just as she tells of the rape of Persephone. And in the rape of Persephone, Hades, the underworld god, as I've introduced to you, comes up in a chasm and takes down Persephone, daughter of Demeter. And as she's brought down into the underworld, she takes a bite of the pomegranate. And because of this, she is not allowed to leave. And she becomes the queen of the underworld, as married to Hades, otherwise known as Father Dis. The myths of Dionysus tell us that He is the son of Persephone. However, this has its roots not only in Egypt, but all over the Black Sea region of this Chthonian Dionysus, the precursor to Dis Pater, the underworld Zeus, or Chthonian Dionysus, goes back to the Bronze Age. Dionysus is one of the earliest known gods, with archaeological evidence supporting worship of this wine god dating back to 1300 BCE and beyond, with the god's name appearing on clay tablets in the palace of Nestor in Pylos. Some researchers speculate that Hades was originally the Chthonian aspect of Dionysus. Also, Diodorus tells us that this is part of the secrets of the Eleusinian mysteries, which is why we don't know about this in any myths. This was secret information for initiates only. The theory is supported by a Homeric hymn to Demeter, in which Demeter refuses to drink wine, associating it with the god who abducted her daughter, Persephone, as well as two reliefs found in marble votives from the 4th century depicting Persephone and Dionysus as married. In the Orphic tradition, Hades and Dionysus are linked in a different way with the advent of Zagreus. Zagreus is Persephone's son by Zeus. In this myth, Hades is viewed as the chthonic aspect of Zeus, and they were considered interlinked. All of this is going to matter when I get to my conclusion. But first, I want to talk about Pan. Pan is the god of the wild, shepherds, and flocks. Rustic music, often depicted with goat horns, goat legs, and playing the flute. He's also affiliated with sex. Because of this, Pan is connected to fertility and the season of spring, and just like the serpent, he brings rebirth and resurrection. Pan means all in Greek. And just like how I mentioned with Dionysus being depicted or being connected with both Zeus and the underworld, chthonic Hades, Pan also is considered to be an aspect of Jupiter and also an aspect of Bacchus. So Pan, being a rustic god, was not worshipped in temples or built edifices, but in natural settings like caves and grottos, and the slopes of mountains and acropolises of Athens. In Israel, in the Galilee, there is a grotto of Pan known as Banias. I was there myself, and the tradition says that this is the opening to Hades. And this is where Pan is also linked with Hades himself, being called the king of the underworld, and his gateway to the underworld was right here in Israel. Pan also battles with Typhon. In the myths of Pan, he's born in Crete. Pan aided his father and brother in battle with the Titans by letting out a horrible screech and scattering them in terror. This is where Pan becomes the image of the devil. You might have heard of Pan's Labyrinth and thought of this equivalency with the devil and hell. This is an ancient tradition that Strabo in his geography relates to us. In book 17 of Strabo's geography, when he's writing about Egypt, he says, as far as Cyane and Elephantine, there are the Thebes guard station and the canal that leads to Tanis, and then Lyconopolis, Aphrodite's, and the city of Pan, an old settlement of linen and stone workers. He then later on says in the next paragraph, there is also a well that lies at a great depth, so that one goes down to it, a monolithic curved vaults of outstanding size and workmanship. There is a canal that leads to the place from the great river, and around the canal is the grove of the Egyptian Acanthus, sacred to Apollo. Abydos, to have been a great city at one time, second only to Thebes. Today, it is a small settlement. If, as they say, Memnon is called Ismendes by the Egyptians, the Labyrinth would also be Memnonion, and a work of the same person as those in Abydos and in Thebes. For they say there are certain Memnonia there. Beyond Abydos is the first of the three previously mentioned, the oasis of Ammon in Libya, which is 7 days' distance through the desert. In this settlement there is an abundance of water and wine. The second is around Lake Moris, and the third is around the oracle of Ammon. Much has been said about Ammon. So we have a city of Pan, described as a labyrinth. Pan's labyrinth. But also, it is located in a place called Abydos. I find it interesting that this city called Abydos is sacred to Apollo, when in book of Revelation, in verse 11 of chapter 9, it says, "A king, the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek Apollyon," which means destroyer. The bottomless pit being identified with the devil. We see in these both locations, in Pan's labyrinth in Egypt and in Pan's grotto in Israel, there is a path to the bottomless pit, the gateway to Hades, the key of the abyss. In Revelation 20, I saw an angel come down out of heaven having the key to the abyss, and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil, or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. He threw him into the abyss, and locked and sealed it over him, to keep him from deceiving the nations any more, until 1,000 years were ended. Pan is also very much linked with Apollo, as the Strabo relates to us. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, throughout the tales, we're constantly being reminded that Pan, who plays the flute, is hanging out with Apollo, who plays the lyre. This brings us to the topic of Lucifer. Apollo, whose epithet is Phobos, which literally means bright, and his sister Diana, or Artemis, who's known as Lucifera, lightbringer, very much reflect the idea of Venus and Lucifer. The planet Venus is Lucifer, the lightbringer, and Lucifer, according to Hesiod, is Eosphoros, the bringer of the dawn. Nowhere in any Greek or Roman mythology is Eosphoros or Lucifer evil or doing anything considered evil. He's exactly the opposite. He brings the light and salvation. So how does the devil get acquainted with this title, Lucifer? It comes through the stories of the fallen angels. The story of Apollo, who I just mentioned, is said to have built a foundation and altar on Delos using the horns of the goats that his sister Diana hunted. Apollo is said to have invented the lyre, and along with Artemis, the art of archery, and then taught humans the art of healing and archery. This idea of a god teaching humans knowledge would be considered evil. It is directly connected with the serpent in the garden, telling Adam and Eve that they can be like gods if they take a bite of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In the book of Enoch, angels fallen from heaven teach mankind the arts of metal making, healing, root cutting, etc. You might be surprised to know that there is no Satan in Enoch. Satan is not the fallen angels in Enoch. It is Azazel and Samael. Azazel is the scapegoat. During Yom Kippur, one goat who represents Azazel and another goat in Leviticus 16. 2 male goats are to be sacrificed to Yahweh, and one of the 2 was selected by Lot. For Yahweh is seen as speaking through the lots. 1 goat is selected by Lot and sent into the wilderness for Azazel. This goat was then cast out into the desert as a part of Yom Kippur. The scapegoat ritual can be traced back to the 24th century BCE of Ebla, from where it spread throughout the ancient Near East. This was a pagan tradition from the ancient Canaanites. There is another Canaanite deity, an Arab mythology, known as Ezisos. He is equivalent of Phosphoros, the morning star, portrayed riding a camel in the desert. He was venerated in Syria as Lucifer. So now we have this goat, scapegoat god, identified with Pan, is an underworld chthonic deity, and there's a pun on a Luciferian god named Ezisos. Apollo, who is the beautiful god of music and beauty and knowledge, being cast down to earth in punishment by Zeus. This is what is later borrowed for the story of Lucifer, especially in Islam. You also have, as I mentioned, with Enki and Enlil, you have the story of Prometheus, who tells mankind and humans how to build fires and how to be like the gods. He is also punished and chained to a rock. These stories of rebel gods who want to tell humans how to be like gods are what shapes the myth of Lucifer. There is no myth of Lucifer falling from heaven in any Judeo-Christian text ever. This is a later memory, if you will. It's a later collective memory that people put onto Lucifer through these other myths like Prometheus and Apollo and Diana Luciferia.